Veronica Whitmore pointed at the floor and screamed, "Kneel down and clean it, you useless girl!" In front of wealthy guests, Eleanor, her own daughter-in-law, dropped to her knees and wiped the spilled drink with shaking hands while the room laughed. Her husband stood there and said nothing. His mistress smirked. His family watched like it was entertainment. But just as Eleanor's tears hit the marble floor, the butler rushed in and shouted, "A lawyer is here for Mrs. Elena Whitmore." And in less than 60 seconds, the same woman they treated like a maid was about to be revealed as the owner of their company, their mansion, and every luxury they had. Elena Moore stepped into her marriage with a heart full of hope. She was a gentle young woman from a modest home, raised by a hard-working mother who taught her to respect people, stay humble, and believe love could overcome pride. On the day she married Adrian Whitmore, Eleanor truly believed her life was beginning. She thought she was not just marrying a man. She thought she was joining a family. Adrian Whitmore was the polished second son of the powerful Whitmore family, a wealthy household known for old money, strict image, and deep social influence. He stood beside Eleanor in an expensive suit, calm and handsome, saying all the right vows, and as Eleanor looked at him, she held on to one simple belief, that once they entered his world together, he would protect her. But the moment they arrived at the Whitmore mansion, something felt wrong. The house was grand, cold, and almost too perfect, with marble floors, towering windows, and staff standing silently along the entrance hall. Eleanor expected warmth, a smile, a blessing, some sign that she had been accepted. Instead, she was met with eyes that measured her like she did not belong there. At the center of that silence stood Veronica Whitmore, Adrian's mother. Veronica was a proud, sharp-tongued woman who ruled the mansion with control and intimidation. She took one look at Elena's simple bridal gown, her quiet manners, and her modest background, and her face hardened. "So this is the girl," Veronica said, her voice dry with disapproval. "The one my son threw away his standards for." The words landed like a slap. Eleanor tried to smile politely, but she could already hear the whispers around her. Adrian's relatives stood nearby, pretending not to stare, while quietly judging every part of her. One cousin leaned toward another and muttered that Adrian had married beneath his class. Another let out a soft laugh and said the Whitmores must be desperate if this was the bride they brought home. And still, no one welcomed her. No flowers, no embrace, no kind words. Even the doorway into the mansion felt less like an entrance and more like a test she had already failed. Veronica looked Elena up and down and spoke again, this time even more clearly. "Love may have brought you into this house," she said, "but love alone does not earn respect in this family." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. That evening, at her very first family dinner, things only got worse. The long dining table was filled with expensive dishes, polished silver, and people who made sure Eleanor felt small in every possible way. One relative asked if she had ever eaten food this fine before. Another laughed and asked whether girls from neighborhoods like hers even knew how to hold the proper cutlery. Eleanor lowered her eyes, trying to keep her dignity. Across the table, Adrian noticed everything. He saw the mockery, he heard the insults, he saw the pain growing in his new wife's face, but he said nothing, not one word, and that silence hurt Eleanor more than all the cruel laughter in the room. That night, as she sat alone in her new bedroom inside the vast and unfamiliar mansion, Eleanor stared into the darkness and understood a terrible truth. She had not entered a home. She had entered a place where she would have to fight just to be treated like a human being. And on the very first night of her marriage, Eleanor began to fear that this union was not a dream. It was a trap. The following morning, Eleanor learned just how quickly hope could die inside the Whitmore mansion. She had barely slept. The cold silence of her first night still clung to her chest when a sharp knock hit her bedroom door before sunrise. Eleanor opened it to find Veronica Whitmore standing there, already dressed, already stern, already looking at her as if she were something far below the family name. "You're still in bed?" Veronica said. "In this house, lazy women do not stay under my roof." Eleanor quickly apologized, thinking perhaps she had made some mistake, but Veronica was not there to correct her. She was there to establish control. Without another word, Veronica led her downstairs and handed her a list of chores so long Eleanor had to read it twice. Sweep the upstairs hall, dust the library, clean the breakfast room, polish the silver, organize the laundry room, then prepare tea before the rest of the family came down. Eleanor looked up in confusion. "Shouldn't the house staff handle some of this?" Veronica's expression turned cold. "Not anymore." That was how Eleanor learned the first rule of her new life. The maids would still work in the mansion, but certain duties had been taken away from them and forced onto her. Veronica said Eleanor needed to earn her keep. In one sentence, the woman had stripped her of her place as a bride and reduced her to unpaid labor, and that cruelty did not stop there. By mid-morning, Adrian's younger sister, Vanessa Whitmore, entered one of the guest rooms Eleanor had just cleaned. Vanessa was a spoiled, sharp-mouthed woman who enjoyed using humiliation like entertainment. Eleanor had barely stepped away when Vanessa deliberately knocked over perfume bottles, pulled clothes from a chair, and scattered cushions across the floor. A few minutes later, she called out loudly, "Mother, Eleanor didn't clean this room properly." Veronica came in, saw the mess, and blamed Eleanor instantly. She did not ask questions. She did not care about the truth. She simply scolded Eleanor in front of the servants and told her to start over. That afternoon, guests arrived for tea. Eleanor thought for one small moment that she would finally be introduced properly as Adrian's wife. Instead, Veronica ordered her into the sitting room carrying a silver tray. "Serve," she said, "and do not embarrass this family." Eleanor stood there pouring tea into delicate cups while the women sitting around the room looked at her with amusement. No one invited her to sit. No one spoke to her with dignity. To them, she was not the daughter-in-law of the house. She was just another pair of hands. As the day dragged on, Veronica found fault with everything. The tea was not hot enough. The floor still looked dull. Eleanor's hair was too plain. Her voice was too soft. Her posture was not elegant enough. Before sunset, Eleanor had been criticized for her cooking, her cleaning, and even the way she carried herself. Then came another humiliation. Veronica informed her that the main family sitting room was not for her use unless she was serving someone. Eleanor was expected to stay in smaller back areas of the house when she was not working. It was one of the servants, an older housemaid named Martha, who quietly handed Elena a glass of water later that evening and whispered, "You don't deserve this." That small kindness nearly broke her. When Adrian returned home, he found Elena exhausted, standing in the hallway with sore hands and tired eyes. He could see she had been crying. He could see what his mother was doing. But once again, he chose silence. And in that silence, Elena began to understand something painful. This was no longer just a cold family. It was a house that intended to crush her slowly, day by day. A few weeks after Elena was turned into a servant inside her own marriage, the silence in the Whitmore mansion became even more painful. By then, Elena no longer waited for kindness from Veronica. She no longer expected fairness from Vanessa. But deep inside, she still held on to one fragile hope, that Adrian, her husband, would finally see what was happening and stand by her. Instead, he began slipping further away. Adrian started coming home later than before. Some nights, Eleanor would hear the front doors open long after dinner had ended. Other nights, he would not return until she was already in bed pretending to sleep. When he did speak to her, his words were brief, distant, and empty. The warmth he showed her before the wedding was fading so fast that Eleanor started to wonder if she had imagined it. Veronica noticed that distance and used it like a weapon. Every chance she got, she compared Eleanor to the wealthy women in their circle. At breakfast, she would mention a banker's daughter who played piano and spoke 3 languages. At lunch, she would praise a senator's niece with elegance and pedigree. At dinner, she would sigh and say, Adrian should have married a woman who reflected the Whitmore name. Eleanor heard every word. Then one afternoon, Veronica introduced a woman who would make Eleanor's life even worse. Her name was Cassandra Vale. Cassandra was a glamorous, polished socialite from a powerful family, the kind of woman Veronica had always wanted Adrian to marry. She arrived in designer clothes, with perfect makeup, a confident smile, and the kind of pride that filled every room before she even spoke. The moment Eleanor saw the way Veronica welcomed her, with warmth, praise, and open admiration, she understood exactly what was happening. This was not just a guest, this was a message. Veronica seated Cassandra in the main sitting room and called her the kind of woman who understands class. Then she asked Elena to serve them tea. Elena entered quietly with the tray, and Cassandra looked her over from head to toe with a slow, amused smile. "So this is Adrian's wife?" Cassandra asked lightly. "I thought the family hired a new maid." The room filled with laughter. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the tray, but she said nothing. What hurt even more was Adrian's reaction. He was there, he heard it. He saw his wife standing in silence while another woman mocked her in his own home. And still, he did nothing. In fact, things got even worse. Cassandra became a regular presence in the mansion. Veronica invited her to lunches, dinners, and family outings. At every event, Cassandra stayed close to Adrian, laughing too loudly at his jokes, touching his arm too comfortably, and speaking to him as if Eleanor did not exist. One evening, during a family gathering, Eleanor passed by a half-open door and heard voices inside. "He deserved a better wife," someone whispered. "A woman with status," another voice replied, "not someone they have to train like household help." Then came Cassandra's voice, smooth and cruel. "She is not a wife," she said. "She's a maid disguised as one." Eleanor stopped cold. The words hit harder than she expected. That night, after the guests had left, she finally found Adrian alone and gathered the courage to confront him. "Why are you letting this happen?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why do you let your mother insult me? Why do you let Cassandra humiliate me in front of everyone?" Adrian did not look at her for long. He exhaled, already annoyed, as if her pain were an inconvenience. "Not everything needs to become drama, Eleanor," he said. "Learn to ignore it." Then he turned and walked away. And just like that, Eleanor was left standing alone in the hallway, staring after the man she had married, finally seeing the truth with painful clarity. Her husband was not her protector. He was just another part of the cruelty surrounding her. The following week, the cruelty inside the Whitmore mansion stopped being private. Until then, Eleanor had been humiliated behind closed doors, in quiet hallways, and at family tables where only a few people could witness her pain. But Veronica Whitmore was no longer satisfied with controlling Elena in secret. She wanted something bigger now. She wanted the entire upper circle to see exactly how little value the new bride had in that house. So she planned a formal gathering. That evening, the Whitmore mansion glowed with wealth. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Elegant guests in expensive clothes filled the entrance hall with laughter, perfume, and polished smiles. Business associates, socialites, and old family friends arrived expecting another flawless Whitmore event. And Elena, the legal wife of Adrian Whitmore, was hidden away. Veronica ordered her to remain in the kitchen while the guests were welcomed. Elena could hear the music, the clinking glasses, and the flow of conversation from the other side of the walls. She stood there in silence, wearing a simple dress, listening as strangers entered the home where she was supposed to belong. For a moment she told herself maybe it was better this way, but Veronica had no intention of sparing her. After the guests had settled in, Veronica marched into the kitchen, looked Eleanor over with cold satisfaction, and said, "Enough hiding. Come out. If you're going to be in this house, you might as well be useful." She placed a serving tray into Elena's hands and led her into the grand reception hall. The room was full of people from the Whitmore's world, and the moment Eleanor appeared carrying drinks, heads turned. Some looked confused, some looked amused, others simply watched, waiting to understand why the bride of the family was serving guests like hired staff. Then Cassandra struck. Standing near Adrian in a shimmering designer gown, Cassandra let out a soft laugh and said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I almost feel bad for her. She really tried to dress above her station tonight." A few guests chuckled. Another woman glanced at Elena's clothes and smirked. You can always tell when someone is trying too hard to look like they belong. Elena kept walking, trying to keep her hands steady. But the worst moment came when an older guest accepted a glass from her, frowned in confusion, and asked the question that froze the room. "Wait," he said, looking from Eleanor to Veronica. "Isn't this Adrian's wife?" The air changed instantly. No one answered. That silence said everything. Before Elena could recover, a drink was spilled near the center table. It was not even her fault. But Veronica saw an opportunity and seized it at once. "Elena," she snapped, "get down there and clean it, now!" Eleanor stared at her in disbelief. "In front of everyone?" her eyes seemed to ask. Veronica's face hardened. "Do not make me repeat myself." With dozens of eyes on her, Eleanor slowly knelt to the polished floor and began wiping the spill by hand, while whispers moved across the room like poison. She could hear the soft laughter, she could feel the shame burning across her skin, and when she looked up, she saw Adrian. He was watching. He saw his wife on the floor, humiliated before his family's entire world, and once again, he said nothing. That was the moment something inside Elena finally cracked. She rose as soon as she could, set the cloth aside, and walked out before anyone could stop her. She made it to the kitchen, then to the back corridor, and finally collapsed in tears, where no guests could see her. That night, with her face still wet and her heart aching, Eleanor sat alone in the dark and faced the truth she had been trying to deny. If she stayed in that house much longer, it would destroy her completely. A few days after that public humiliation, the air inside the Whitmore mansion changed again, but not for the better. Eleanor had withdrawn into herself. She still did the work Veronica forced on her. She still moved quietly through the halls. She still kept her pain hidden whenever she could. But something in her had shifted after that night on the floor in front of strangers. The shame was still there, but now it sat beside something else. A quiet awareness. She could no longer pretend this family would one day accept her. She could no longer lie to herself that Adrian would suddenly become the husband she had hoped for. Still, even in that pain, Eleanor was not prepared for how far Veronica was willing to go. Veronica had made up her mind. If Eleanor would not leave on her own, then she would be pushed out in pieces. That week, Veronica began speaking more openly about Cassandra, not even bothering to hide her intentions anymore. At breakfast, she praised Cassandra's elegance, her social connections, and her natural place among elite families. At lunch, she said Adrian needed a woman who could elevate the Whitmore name, not burden it. By evening, she was practically presenting Cassandra as the woman who should have been in Elena's place all along, and Adrian did not stop any of it. In fact, he grew colder. He no longer even pretended to care how Elena felt. If she spoke, he answered with impatience. If she tried to explain herself, he dismissed her with a look. He began treating her like an interruption in his life, like an unfortunate decision he was too embarrassed to admit. Then came another trap. One afternoon, Veronica stormed into the sitting room, holding an important document, and demanded to know who had moved it from her desk. Eleanor, who had not even stepped into Veronica's office that day, was immediately accused. "You are always touching things that do not belong to you," Veronica snapped. "I didn't take it," Eleanor said softly, but her voice made no difference. Vanessa swore she had seen Elena near the office. Cassandra, who happened to be visiting, folded her arms and smirked as the accusations grew. Within minutes, Elena was blamed for carelessness, dishonesty, and disrespect, all over something she had never touched. Then Veronica delivered the threat she had been waiting to use. "If you do not learn your place in this house," she said, her voice low and cruel, "I will make sure you leave it with nothing." Those words followed Eleanor all day. That night, the cruelty became even more personal. Eleanor returned to her room to find Cassandra already inside. The woman stood by the window as if she belonged there, smiling the kind of smile only cruel people wore when they were certain they had already won. "You should stop pretending," Cassandra said, turning slowly. "Everyone here knows you do not belong. The only reason you are still in this house is because you have not found the dignity to walk out." Eleanor stared at her, stunned that this woman had the boldness to invade the only private space she had left. Cassandra stepped closer. "Women like me are who men like Adrian choose in the end," she said. "Women like you are just the mistake they regret." For a moment, Eleanor could not even speak. The insult was sharp, deliberate, and meant to crush whatever hope she had left. After Cassandra finally left, Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, trying to steady her breathing. That was when she noticed something half hidden in the bottom drawer of an old wooden box she had brought from her mother's home. Inside were papers she had not looked at in years, faded letters, a sealed envelope, a legal name written more than once, Charles Ashford. Eleanor frowned. She had seen that name before as a child, but her late mother had always brushed it aside and refused to explain. Back then, Eleanor assumed it meant nothing, but now, holding those papers in trembling hands, she felt a strange weight settle over her. Why had her mother kept these? Why had that name been hidden? And why did it suddenly feel important now? She did not have answers yet, only instinct. But for the first time, Eleanor sensed that her life might hold a truth bigger than the cruelty around her. Meanwhile, downstairs, Veronica was preparing a grand banquet for the coming days. On the surface, it looked like another polished family event, but Elena could feel it. This was not just a dinner, it was a stage, and Veronica was planning one final humiliation, one she believed would break Eleanor for good. She had no idea that the fall she was planning was not Eleanor's. It was her own. 3 nights after Eleanor found the papers hidden among her late mother's things, the Whitmore mansion prepared for the banquet that Veronica believed would destroy her once and for all. From the early hours of the evening, the house was dressed in wealth. Crystal chandeliers glowed above polished floors. Long tables were covered in silk runners, gold-trimmed plates, and fresh flowers flown in that morning. Business partners, society wives, and powerful guests filled the mansion once again, all of them laughing, drinking, and admiring the image of Whitmore perfection. But behind that perfect image, Veronica was sharpening one final knife. Eleanor knew it the moment she was called downstairs. She had dressed simply, hoping at least to pass through the evening unseen. But the second Veronica saw her, a cold smile touched her lips. It was the smile of a woman who believed she was in total control. "Do not stand there looking confused," Veronica said. "Take the tea service and do something useful." In that moment, Eleanor understood. This banquet was never meant to honor the family. It was meant to display her humiliation one last time. With trembling hands, she lifted the silver tray. As she moved through the crowded hall, conversations slowed. Guests turned and stared. Some recognized her as Adrian's wife and looked uncomfortable. Others simply watched in silence, already sensing the tension in the room. Eleanor could feel every eye on her, every judgment, every whisper she was not meant to hear. Then came Cassandra. Draped in another glittering gown, standing too close to Adrian as always, Cassandra let out a soft laugh and tilted her head. "Look at that," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "The poor bride finally found the role that suits her." A few people laughed nervously. Eleanor looked toward Adrian. He stood there in his dark suit, handsome, calm, and utterly useless. He saw her shame. He heard the mockery. He knew what his mother and Cassandra were doing. And as always, he lowered his eyes and let it happen. That silence should have broken Eleanor. Instead, it became the final proof that she was truly alone in that house. Just as Veronica opened her mouth to make another cutting remark, the butler entered the hall with unusual urgency. He stopped near the center of the room, cleared his throat, and spoke in a voice that carried across the crowd. "Madam, there is a lawyer here, asking to see Mrs. Elena Moore Whitmore." The room went still. Veronica frowned. "A lawyer? For her?" Murmurs spread instantly. Elena tightened her grip on the tray, confused. Adrian looked up at last. Cassandra's smile faded. Then the front doors opened. A distinguished older man in a tailored suit walked in, followed by two executives carrying leather folders. He moved with calm authority, the kind that silenced a room without effort. When he reached the center of the hall, he looked directly at Elena. "Mrs. Elena Moore Whitmore?" he asked. Elena swallowed. "Yes, that's me." The lawyer gave a small, respectful nod. "My name is Harold Bennett. I represent the estate of the late Charles Ashford." The name hit Eleanor like a distant echo. Charles Ashford, the same name she had just seen in her mother's papers. Around the room, several guests reacted at once. One businessman visibly stiffened. Another whispered, "Ashford, as in Ashford Global?" The lawyer continued. "After a lengthy private investigation, legal verification, and confirmed records, it has been established that Charles Ashford was your biological father." A stunned silence swallowed the room. Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came. Harold Bennett opened a file. "Mr. Ashford passed away 6 months ago, under the terms of his will, and with no other surviving legal children. You are his only heir." A glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered. Veronica's face drained of color. Cassandra took a step back. Adrian stared as though the floor had vanished under him. But Harold Bennett was not finished. "There is one further matter," he said. "Before his death, Mr. Ashford quietly acquired majority ownership of Whitmore Holdings through a legal chain of purchases and trust transfers. That trust now passes to you." He turned fully toward Eleanor. "Effective immediately, Mrs. Eleanor Moore Whitmore, you are now the majority owner of Whitmore Holdings." The room exploded with shocked whispers. The family company, the mansion, the luxury cars, the accounts funding the Whitmores' entire life, all of it, owned by the same woman they had forced to serve tea. Veronica looked as if she might collapse. Adrian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Cassandra, for the first time since Eleanor had known her, had nothing to say. And in the center of that silent, shattered world, Eleanor stood frozen, still holding the tray they had used to humiliate her, while the truth rose around her like thunder. The woman they treated like a servant now owned everything. The moment Harold Bennett announced that Elena now owned Whitmore Holdings, the grand banquet hall stopped feeling like Veronica Whitmore's kingdom. It felt like a courtroom, and every cruel word the family had spoken to Elena now seemed to hang in the air like evidence. For a few seconds, no one moved. The guests stood frozen with their glasses in hand. The servants kept their eyes lowered, but even they could feel it. The shift in power was so sudden, so complete, that the room itself seemed to change. The same mansion that had watched Eleanor be insulted, ordered around, and reduced to a servant had just become hers. Veronica was the first to react. Her lips trembled, her proud posture weakened. Then, as if a switch had been flipped inside her, her tone changed completely. "Eleanor," she said softly, almost sweetly. "My dear girl, why didn't you tell us? You should have said something. You are family." Family. That word nearly made Elena laugh. Just hours earlier, Veronica had ordered her to carry tea like hired help. For months, she had used Elena's pain as entertainment. And now, because the truth had changed, Veronica wanted to rewrite the past with one gentle word. Eleanor did not answer her. Adrian stepped forward next. For the first time in a long time, his face was no longer calm. He looked shaken, desperate, and afraid. The man who had stood silent through every insult now seemed to have found his voice all at once. "Eleanor, listen to me," he said. "This changes everything. We can talk about this privately. Whatever happened before, we can move past it. You're my wife." Eleanor slowly turned to look at him. "My wife," she repeated quietly. The words were not warm. They were sharp. She set the silver tray down on the nearest table with deliberate calm, then faced him fully. For once, no one interrupted her. No one dared. "You remember I am your wife now?" she asked. "Not when your mother turned me into a servant. Not when your sister blamed me for things I didn't do. Not when Cassandra mocked me in this house. Not when I was on the floor cleaning in front of your guests." Adrian's face tightened. "Eleanor." "No," she said, cutting him off. "You do not get to speak over me now. You had many chances to speak before. You used none of them." The silence that followed was heavy and deserved. Guests looked from Adrian to Elena, watching the truth unfold in a way no performance could hide. This was no misunderstanding. This was consequence. Then Elena looked toward Harold Bennett and the executive standing behind him. "Prepare the legal papers," she said, her voice steady. "I want my divorce from Adrian Whitmore filed immediately." The room erupted into whispers. Veronica gasped. "No, Elena, don't be rash." But Elena was not done. She turned toward the front of the room, where members of the Whitmore family still stood in stunned disbelief, and her next words landed like a hammer. "Effective immediately, Veronica Whitmore is removed as acting chairwoman of Whitmore Holdings." Veronica let out a broken sound, half gasp, half plea. "Eleanor, please." "Adrian Whitmore," Eleanor continued, not even looking at him now, "is removed from executive management pending full review." Adrian went pale. She faced the gathered staff and executives with the calm authority of someone who had suffered long enough and was finally done apologizing for surviving it. "All family allowances tied to company accounts are suspended," she said. "Every vehicle registered under company ownership will be collected tonight. All discretionary spending is frozen, and this residence, including all operations within it, now answers to me alone." The butler, who had watched everything in silence for months, bowed his head. "Yes, madam." That one word changed everything. Madam. Not maid, not burden, not mistake. "Madam." Cassandra, who had always hidden behind arrogance, quietly stepped backward through the crowd, her face drained of color. She understood before anyone said it aloud. The game was over. The woman she had mocked now controlled the house, the company, the staff, and the future. Veronica looked as though the ground beneath her had collapsed. Adrian tried once more to step closer, but Elena's expression stopped him before he could speak. The woman they had broken in pieces was gone. In her place stood someone colder, clearer, and far more powerful than any of them had imagined. And for the first time since entering that mansion, Elena was no longer asking for dignity. She was claiming what was already hers. The following morning, the Whitmores woke up expecting ruin. After the chaos of the banquet, none of them slept well. Veronica spent the night pacing her room in disbelief. Adrian sat in silence, replaying every moment he had failed Elena. Vanessa wept over the thought of losing her status. They all believed Elena would choose the most obvious revenge, throw them out of the mansion, strip them of everything, and leave them to face the world in disgrace. But Elena had already decided on something far more painful. She did not want them homeless. She wanted them humbled. By sunrise, the mansion no longer moved to Veronica's commands. Staff members who once bowed to the old family hierarchy now answered only to Elena. The house manager, the legal team, and senior company officers were already in place when the Whitmores were called into the main hall. Elena stood at the front of the room, calm and composed, no longer the trembling bride they used to mock. She wore authority with quiet strength, and that frightened them more than anger ever could. Veronica tried first. "Elena," she said, forcing a weak smile, "whatever happened yesterday, we can still handle this as a family." Elena looked at her without emotion. "Family," she repeated. "You used that word only after you lost power." The room went still. Then Elena gave the order that changed the rest of their lives. "You are not being thrown out," she said. "That would be too easy. You spent months looking down on labor, mocking service, and treating honest work like shame. So from today, you will learn exactly what that work feels like." Veronica's expression cracked. "What do you mean?" Elena turned to the executives beside her. "Reassignment letters," she said. One by one, envelopes were placed into stunned hands. Veronica opened hers first. Her fingers trembled as she read the page. "No," she whispered. She had been reassigned to the archives department of Whitmore Holdings. No title, no private office, no assistants, no luxury schedule. She would report in a plain employee uniform, sort old records, file documents, and answer to a department supervisor. Vanessa opened hers next and let out a sharp cry. She had been placed at the company reception desk, where she would greet visitors, answer calls, and stand for hours serving people she once considered beneath her. Then Adrian unfolded his letter. His punishment was different, but no less humiliating. He had been reassigned to the logistics division, a low-level operations role under strict oversight. No executive privileges, no corner office, no authority. He would handle shipment reports, inventory paperwork, and daily floor tasks under managers who would judge him only by performance. Adrian looked up, stunned. "Elena, you can't be serious." "I am," she said. Other relatives received their own reassignments: records, supply, support services, maintenance coordination. The message was the same for all of them. No rank, no luxury, no special treatment. "And one more thing," Elena added. "All personal allowances are permanently suspended. The cars are being collected. The staff will no longer serve you outside standard house operations. If you want comfort now, earn it." Veronica's voice shook with outrage. This is humiliation. Eleanor's gaze hardened. No, she said. Humiliation was making me kneel on the floor in front of your guests. This is education. No one had an answer for that. In the weeks that followed, the lesson became real. Veronica, once proud and untouchable, sat in a grey office sorting dusty files, while junior employees gave her instructions. Vanessa smiled at visitors who barely noticed her name. Adrian carried reports across warehouse floors, sweating through long days, under supervisors who cared nothing for the Whitmore name. For the first time in their lives, they saw the workers they had ignored, the assistants, the clerks, the cleaners, the support staff, the people whose labor had always carried the weight of the company, while the Whitmores took the credit. And slowly, painfully, they learned what Eleanor had known all along. There is dignity in work, there is honor in humility, and there is justice when pride finally meets consequence. Months later, Eleanor stood at the top of both Ashford Global and Whitmore Holdings as a respected chairwoman, admired not just for her power, but for the fairness with which she used it. She protected loyal workers, restored discipline, and built a culture where no one would ever be treated as less than human again. The mansion, the cars, the company, the empire, it was all hers. But unlike the family that once ruled through cruelty, Eleanor ruled with balance, and that became the Whitmores' greatest punishment of all. Every day they had to walk into a company owned by the woman they once treated like a maid. Every day they had to answer to the woman they tried to break. And every day they were reminded that the quiet bride they underestimated had become the one person above them all. Before we close this story, here's the lesson I hope you take with you. The Whitmores thought money gave them the right to treat people like tools. They looked down on work. They laughed at humility. They confused power with worth. But life has a way of exposing pride. And sometimes, the person you disrespect in private becomes the person the world listens to in public. Eleanor didn't win because she screamed the loudest. She won because she stayed steady. She endured what was unfair, but when the truth came out, she didn't use her power to become cruel. She used it to bring order, and that's the difference between someone who only has money and someone who truly has class. Now let me ask you something. Who was your favorite character in this story? Was it Eleanor, for staying calm and finally taking control? Was it Martha, the quiet worker who showed kindness when nobody else did? Or did you find yourself watching Adrian, frustrated, waiting for him to grow a backbone? And here's my honest opinion as your narrator. The most painful character to watch was Adrian. Not because he was loud and wicked, but because he was weak. Veronica was openly cruel, but Adrian's silence helped the cruelty survive. That kind of silence destroys homes faster than shouting ever will. So if this story moved you, do me a favor. Hit the like button, share it with someone who loves a good reversal, and subscribe, because the next story is going to be even crazier. This is Mr. Hope, and I'll see you in the next story.